Hello, I'm Paul, and this is Paul Plays with Fire. Welcome. Today we're going to be making some Mexican favorites. We're going to be making guacamole, pico de gallo, tortilla chips, and pickled onions. So let's get busy. First thing we're going to do is make the pico de gallo, and that is a few hot peppers, just a few, an onion that we're going to dice up really fine, some very fresh looking tomatoes that will look really good. They're nice and red. They're a little expensive, but they're worth it. You know, sometimes a splurge on a fresh tomato in the middle of the winter is just enough to get you through to the other side. And then we're going to put a little lime juice and a little salt on that, and then a little cilantro at the end. So let's start with the onion. We're going to cut it across the middle this way, being careful not to slice the edge of our fingers off. Then we're going to cut it this way, as close as we can get it, and then finally this way, as thin as we can get it. And what you're going to get out of that is a very finely diced onion. And that's just what we want for this, because nobody likes a big old hunk of onion. Although, you know, once it sits and marinates for a little bit, it's really pretty good. And I've seen different people do different pico de gallos in different ways. You know, sometimes they leave a lot of onion and a lot of tomato and hardly any pepper. And sometimes it's just the opposite, hardly any onion, mostly tomato, and sometimes it's all pepper. And then we'll take that all, put it in our bowl over here. Now we're going to chop that up a little bit more, just to make sure we got everything small. Just give that a quick fine chop. That looks about right. When we were in Mexico with my siblings, every day about 3:30, 4 o'clock, we were renting a house with a full kitchen. And about 3 o'clock or so, I'd start making pico de gallo, and I'd make some guacamole, and I'd make some pickled onions, and then we'd have a little feast and maybe have an adult beverage or two while we were getting ready for dinner. It was just really nice. And now we're going to take our peppers and very carefully cut them up. This is an Anaheim pepper. Mrs. Paul Plays with Fire is not a really big fan of hot foods, so I try and keep it my pico de gallo on the mild side, if you will. And I gotta admit, in my elderly age, that I'm not a really big fan of hot food either. I sometimes indulge anyway, and I usually pay for it. I pay for it later. So we'll get all the seeds and the membrane out of there. And then we'll, once again, just cut that up really, really fine. We'll cut it into strips. And then we'll dice those strips. We'll just dice those up. See how nice and small those are? That's just about right. Just a little bit of heat, not a lot. The tiniest bit of heat. But it provides that nice fresh pepper flavor too. I think that's pretty good. That's about enough. And next we have a tiny little serrano, just because we like to live dangerously. We're just going to cut the edges off of that, being careful to avoid the seeds and anything else that is inside it. That's enough right there. There, that's just enough. We'll try and sneak that one in on Mrs. Paul Plays with Fire, see if she notices. Because capsicum's actually good for you. It has many health benefits, including it's like an anti-inflammatory, and you know, if you're hurting somewhere else, it'll take your mind off it. And we're going to dice that up really fine, and then I'm going to go wash my hands. I can smell the heat coming up. There we go. That's about right. Hopefully don't hurt anybody. Okay, now I'm gonna go wash my hands. Okay, we've got our onions and our peppers looking very nice right there. Now we're going to take a little bit of lime, take about the juice of a lime and juice it right over the top of it. And the lime really does, the little acidity in the lime really does balance out the flavor of this, and also it acts as a little bit of a softening agent. You know, a little bit of lime and a little bit of thyme will settle this all right down into a nice mix. So there, we got that in there. Now we're going to add some salt, just kind of to taste, but I like a little bit of salt in this. And the salt helps to balance the flavor, or the tartness, the acidity of the lime juice. So the two kind of work together. If something tastes too limey, add some salt. If it tastes too salty, add some lime. Okay, now we're going to let that sit for a little bit while we cut up some tomatoes. Normally I would use Roma tomatoes for this, but these were just, I think they're actually an Italian tomato that were on the vine, and like I said, they're really, I tried one before we got started here, and it was really, really good. I think I've got about 10 tomatoes here, and they are ripe. I let them ripen on the counter from the store, even though they were pretty ripe, because I was trying to get the avocados to catch up with them. The avocados were still pretty firm, so we had to, it was a balancing act to try and get the two ready at the same time. Yeah, they're ripe all right. And we're not going to try and remove the seeds or anything. We're just going straight for the everything. So, well, they're not going to exactly cooperate. Romas do a better job of this. I tried to get fancy, and the tomato flavor here is delicious, but Romas have a little more flesh to seed ratio and hold up a little better. So I recommend you try Romas. And a sharp knife helps too. Mine is pretty sharp, but this will just add to that wonderful acid mix that's in the Pico de Gallo already. I had Mrs. Paul Plays with Fire try the tomato when I was tasting them, and she said, boy, that is delicious, but it's a little tart. I said, yeah, it needs salt to balance the acid. That's exactly what it does. And I don't want to put them in a blender or puree them or anything like that. That would be a sacrilege to the tomato. It would be a disservice to the tomatoes. I want some pieces of tomato, even some bigger pieces. Well, it wasn't pretty, but we got all those tomatoes cut up and put into the Pico de Gallo. So now we're just going to mix that up best we can and see what we got. Oh yeah, it looks pretty good. Looks like a nice balance of colors and flavors. The more we mix it, the more I see the onions and the peppers coming to the top. Just juicy enough to keep you interested. Looks delicious. You know what it's missing now? Cilantro. And I realize cilantro isn't for everybody. About 20% of the population thinks it tastes like soap. And I've even read that on a DNA test, you can tell whether somebody has that soap reaction to cilantro. But let me tell you a story. When I was younger, I could not stand cilantro. I thought it tasted like soap. As I got older, I don't know whether I just forced it on myself or I said I need to learn to like this. And now I love the stuff. So anyway, you can change. You may not like it now, but you can change. So we're just going to take some cilantro, and we're going to just roughly, rustically toss it up into there. We're just going to toss the leaves. I don't really want the stems, so we're just going to toss some leaves in there until we think it looks about right. And then we're going to let that sit in the fridge for half hour while the flavors get to know each other. And now we're going to make our guacamole. It's always a little bit of a risk making guacamole in the Midwest, because let's face it, we don't grow avocados here. They don't grow on trees here. So you have to buy them ahead. You have to get them when they're not ripe and let them ripen at home. And it's always kind of a waiting game. So moment of truth here, we'll cut the end. I always cut the end off my avocados. just because if anything's going to be bad, the end is going to be bad, and the end looks really good. And the avocado on the end looks really good too. So we'll cut that in half. Oh, that looks just perfect. Just what we want. Okay, that's one. We're gonna do two today because it's just Mrs. Paul Plate's Fire and I, so we don't wanna make too much because you don't wanna make guacamole ahead. It just doesn't work. There, that's another one that looks really good. And the cut in looks really good. I think I bought these avocados 5 days ago, so that's the, oh, perfect, just perfect. I'm so happy. So now we're gonna take the avocados, skin them out into a bowl. I'm just whacking it with the back corner of the knife to get the corner to stick, and then I can pull the pit out. Better than trying to dig it out because it never works. And my guacamole is very simple. It is avocado, salt, lime juice. That's it, nothing else. If you want to add tomatoes or onions or peppers, guess what? You got a bowl of Pico de Gallo. You could just combine it. I don't even put cilantro in it. I know, and if I was going to add one more thing to my guacamole, it would probably be cilantro, and I may do that today. So now we're gonna take a lime, juice that lime right into in with the avocados, and the lime juice will also help the avocado from turning brown. That's one of the reasons you don't make guacamole ahead of time, because as soon as you cut it, it starts, or as soon as you touch it at all, it starts turning brown. But the lime juice really helps with that. I probably added too much lime juice, but that's okay. It will fade in time, and we can add a little salt to kind of balance that out. So now, speaking of salt, we're just gonna add some salt, probably about a teaspoon per avocado. And I think the same with the lime juice is about a teaspoon per avocado. And then we're just gonna mash that up the best we can, but don't turn it into a puree by all means. You wanna leave some hunks of avocado in there. It's supposed to be chunky. There's no such thing as creamy guacamole. It's supposed to be chunky guacamole. And I have, over the years, tried all sorts of different things. I've tried sour cream in my guacamole, yuck. I've tried yogurt in my guacamole, yuck. Avocado, that's what you need in your guacamole. Nice ripe avocado, a little lime juice, and a little salt. About overrun my bowl, but that's okay, because it's right where I want it. And once you get it in the bowl and it needs to sit for a little bit, the less oxygen you can get on it, the better off you are. So a nice full bowl is just exactly what you want. I'm gonna give that one last stir. That'll be perfect in about an hour. So we're going to cover that and put it in the fridge. Next up, we're making pickled onions. These are kind of the unsung heroes of Mexican cooking, because if you go into almost any good Mexican restaurant, they'll have pickled onions somewhere in their kitchen or out as a condiment, but you just don't see them that often. People don't think of them around here. So I've got one regular red onion that I've cut the top off. I'm gonna split that down the middle this way. I'm gonna try a little different cutting technique this time. We're going to cut it lengthwise. And then we're going to cut the end off. And look, we've got all these wonderful pieces of onion that go right in there. And they're just nicely shaped. I normally cut rounds or cut half rounds, but this seems to be a little more elegant, so I like that. Plus something about it does less cellular damage to the onion, so it doesn't make you cry as much, or I don't know. Onions never really made me cry, I guess. Spent enough time working at a pizza place around cut onions that I guess I got a little immune to it. Cut that end off again. And then just into the pan they go. Now there's two different ways to make pickled onions. At least, well, there's more than that, but one of the choices is hot vinegar versus cold vinegar. Hot vinegar is nice in that you can have pickled onions in just a fairly short amount of time. But it does cook the onions a little bit, changes their texture and flavor. The other choice is a little bit of just cold vinegar and then some thyme. And I don't mean thyme like the seasoning, I mean thyme like T-I-M-E. They need to spend a day or two in the fridge to get them to be to their fully pickled state. They're still okay before then. That's not going to kill you or anything, but they're just, the onions soften up over time. So now we got that. Now we're going to add just some regular old white vinegar, nothing fancy, no apple cider vinegar or anything. We're just going to pour it right over the top. Enough to cover. It doesn't even have to all the way cover because the vinegar will bring the moisture out of the onions and they'll cover themselves. And then we're also, just because we like lime juice, we're going to squeeze a whole lime in there just to add some citrus flavor to it. In the Yucatan Peninsula, because they have a lot of limes and maybe not so much vinegar, they do all their pickling of onions in citrus. It's a lot of lime, and it kind of takes away from the onion flavor. So we're using just a little bit of lime and mostly vinegar, and then we're going to follow that up with a little bit of salt. I think a teaspoon or two. It's pickling, so it's not that big a deal. You can also add a little sugar to it, but we're not going to do that today. So there, pickled onions, and they'll go in the fridge, and they'll be good today, but better in 2 days. Okay, now we're going to make our corn tortillas, our tortilla chips. And what we've done is we've taken a regular old corn tortilla and just cut it into quarters. And now we're going to drop it into oil that's about 350 degrees, very gently so we don't shock anybody. Well, that looks like the right temperature. And don't crowd the pan either. As they start to get a little puffy, you turn them over. And these will be, if you try this, these will be some of the best tortilla chips you've ever had. Something about them are very fresh and light and natural. Oil's right at 350, 360, so I'll turn that down just a little bit. Don't want to get it too hot, but right around 350, 375 is where it should be. That one's done. That one's done. And take those out to soak on a paper towel. And then right away, before they're completely cooled off, hit them with a little salt. Just a little salt, just like that. Okay, well, look what we've done. We got a very nice plate of pico here. We got some guacamole. We got some chips, homemade chips that we made on the stove. We got some pickled onions, a little cilantro and lime just to go with it. Boy, it sure looks good. Now is probably a good time to ask you to subscribe so you don't miss any of this great content, because we do a lot of this stuff around here. We're planning on doing a lot more. Please subscribe if you can. So anyway, let's go on and taste this stuff. We're gonna start with chips and a little Pico de Gallo. Boy, that's good. The freshness of those tomatoes, and those tomatoes, they were a little bit of a mess to deal with, but they have a really good fresh tomato flavor. And the flavors have all kind of melded. It's really good. And it's just a little bit of zip and not too bad, so even Mrs. Paul Plays With Fire can enjoy it. So let's move on to the guacamole. Oh, hear the crack of those chips? And once again, this is my simple guacamole. I was afraid it was going to have too much lime or too much salt. It has neither. It's perfect. They're in perfect balance. Well, this is great. You know what I really wish right now? I wish I had a plate of tacos. Whoa, how did that happen? That's like a miracle. Okay, well, how do you like that? Let's see, I'm going to put a little guacamole on there. It looks like pollo asado tacos. Marinated chicken tacos. And I'll tell you what, that's another good reason to subscribe, because we're going to be making this sometime in the future, and I'll show you how to make this. So then put a little of the pico in there, or one or two of the onions, and maybe just us. That's really the purpose of all these Mexican condiments, is to build them around tacos, and then just a squeeze of lime to freshen it up at the end. Boy, yeah, that's what it's all about. Well, I'm Paul, and this has been Paul Plays With Fire. Thank you so much for coming to watch today. We had such a good time. We made pico de gallo, we made guacamole, we made pickled onions, and we stumbled onto a plate of tacos. Go figure. See you next time. Thanks for watching.